The waves crashed against the shore with a rhythmic cadence that Zachary Millerton had once found soothing. But today, they only seemed to mock his isolation. At 34, he had everything money could buy, a tech empire worth billions, 3 homes across the globe, and a garage full of cars he rarely drove, yet he walked the deserted beach alone. His Italian leather shoes dangling from his fingertips as the cool sand squished between his toes. Zachary had escaped to his oceanfront Malibu estate after another exhausting board meeting. His company, Miller Tech, had just closed its 4th acquisition of the year, adding another few $100 million to his already substantial net worth. The financial newspapers would celebrate this victory tomorrow, but Zachary felt strangely empty as he stared out at the endless Pacific. "You're going to get soaked if you stand there much longer," a voice called from behind him. Zachary turned, surprised to find another soul on this private stretch of beach. A woman stood a few yards away, camera in hand, the wind whipping her chestnut hair around her face. She wore simple jeans rolled up to her calves and a faded blue sweatshirt that had seen better days. "This is private property," he replied automatically, then immediately regretted the coldness in his voice. She raised an eyebrow. "The tide doesn't know that. It's coming in fast." Zachary glanced down to see water suddenly swirling around his ankles, soaking the hem of his tailored pants. He jumped back with an undignified yelp that made the woman laugh, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to cut through his melancholy like a knife through butter. "I'm Emma Rhodes," she said, stepping closer and offering her hand. "I'm photographing coastal erosion for National Geographic. Your security guard gave me permission to access this section of beach." Zachary took her hand, noticing the calluses on her palm and the strength in her grip. Zachary Millerton. If she recognized his name, and most people did, she didn't show it. Instead, she pointed toward the eroding cliffside. "This area's losing about a foot per year. In 20 years, that magnificent house up there might be joining the ocean." Zachary followed her gaze up to his $28 million home perched on the bluff. "That's sobering. Nature always wins in the end," Emma said with a shrug. She lifted her camera and snapped a photo of the waves crashing against the cliff base. "Beautiful though, isn't it? Even when it's destroying things." There was something refreshing about her frank assessment. In Zachary's world, people either tiptoed around him or wanted something from him. Emma seemed completely unimpressed by his presence. "Are you always this cheerful about impending disaster?" he asked. She laughed again. "I prefer to call it perspective. I've documented melting glaciers in Antarctica and disappearing islands in the Pacific. Makes a mansion falling into the sea seem less catastrophic. A wave crashed particularly close, spraying them both." Emma shrieked with delight, and Zachary found himself smiling for what felt like the first time in months. "You have time for coffee?" he asked impulsively. "There's a place up on the bluff that makes a decent espresso." Emma checked her watch. "I have about an hour before I need to catch the tide pools farther down. Lead the way, Mr. Millerton." "Zachary, please." "Zachary it is." At the small oceanfront cafe, Zachary found himself doing something rare, listening more than talking. Emma described her work as an environmental photojournalist, the places she'd traveled, and the changes she'd witnessed across the globe. Her passion was evident in the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her projects. "So you've been everywhere," Zachary said after their coffees arrived. "What brings you to Malibu? Surely there are more dramatic examples of coastal erosion elsewhere." "Actually, this is part of a series on climate change affecting the homes of the ultra-wealthy," Emma replied, stirring her latte. "The irony that those with the most resources to combat climate change are often the most insulated from its immediate effects." Zachary felt a flush of defensiveness. "Some of us are trying to make a difference. Miller Tech has invested millions in green technology." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, Miller Tech? You're that Zachary Millerton." He braced himself for the usual shift in demeanor, the subtle calculation that appeared in people's eyes when they realized his net worth. Instead, Emma leaned forward. Your solar battery technology is revolutionary. I visited a remote village in Tanzania last year that's using your systems to power their medical clinic. It's literally saving lives. The genuine appreciation in her voice caught him off guard. That's not the aspect of our business that usually impresses people. What? They're more interested in your stock price than the actual impact of your work. She rolled her eyes. Typical. For the next hour, Zachary found himself engaged in one of the most refreshing conversations he'd had in years. Emma challenged his thinking about sustainability initiatives, questioned his company's material sourcing, and suggested partnerships with conservation organizations he'd never considered. Not once did she ask about his personal wealth or lifestyle. When she finally looked at her watch and announced she needed to go catch the tide pools, Zachary felt an unexpected sense of disappointment. "Can I see you again?" he asked as they walked back toward the beach. Emma hesitated. "I'm only in town for another week." "Then I'm off to Alaska for a glacier project." "A week is enough time for dinner at least," he pressed. "Tomorrow night," she studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Okay, but I choose the place, no billionaire hangouts." "Millionaire," he corrected automatically, then laughed at himself. "God, that sounded pretentious." "Just a bit," she teased. The next evening, Zachary found himself sitting in a tiny family-owned Mexican restaurant in a part of Los Angeles he'd never visited. The tables were covered with plastic cloths, the chairs didn't match, and the noise level was considerably higher than the Michelin-starred establishments he frequented. But the food was incredible, and watching Emma's delight as she introduced him to her favorite dishes made the cramped quarters seem charming rather than uncomfortable. "So how does someone become an environmental photojournalist?" Zachary asked as they shared an enormous plate of street tacos. "I started as a marine biology major," Emma explained, "but realized I could make a bigger impact by showing people what was happening to our planet rather than just writing papers about it. A camera became my tool for advocacy." "And you make a living at it," Emma laughed. "Not the kind you're used to, but yes. I live simply, travel constantly, and do what I love. What about you? Was the tech empire always the dream?" Zachary considered the question. "I wanted to build things that mattered. Somewhere along the way, the valuation of the company became the metric everyone used to measure success, including me." "And now," Emma prompted, watching him carefully. "Now I'm sitting in the best restaurant I've never heard of, with someone who couldn't care less about my bank account, wondering why I didn't do this sooner." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on childhood dreams, professional disappointments, and their shared love of the ocean. When Emma mentioned she'd never learned to surf despite all her time near water, Zachary immediately offered to teach her. "I'm actually quite good," he said, without a hint of his usual modesty. "Surfed competitively in college." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess you own a collection of custom boards." "Just 6, he replied with a grin. "We could go tomorrow morning. The waves at my beach are perfect for beginners." To his delight, she agreed. The next morning at dawn, Zachary found himself more excited than he'd been in years as he set up 2 surfboards on the sand. When Emma appeared, wearing a simple black wetsuit she'd rented, he felt a flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with the prospect of surfing. Their lesson was a comedy of errors. Emma was athletically capable but completely unaccustomed to the balance needed for surfing. She tumbled off the board repeatedly, emerging from the water laughing each time. Zachary found her determination charming, and by mid-morning, she managed to stand for a few seconds on a small wave, letting out a whoop of triumph that made him cheer from the water. As they sat on the beach afterward, catching their breath and drying in the sun, Zachary realized he hadn't checked his phone once all morning, something that hadn't happened in years. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "That I can't remember the last time I had this much fun," he admitted. "My life has become meetings, acquisitions, and charity galas I attend out of obligation." "The curse of success," Emma suggested. You've climbed so high you forgot why you started climbing." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. When did you become so wise? Somewhere between the sinking islands and the melting ice caps, she replied with a wry smile. Nothing like witnessing the decline of ecosystems to put human problems in perspective. Over the next 5 days, they fell into a routine that felt anything but routine to Zachary. Mornings were spent on the beach or hiking coastal trails. Afternoons, Emma worked on her photography while Zachary handled the most crucial aspects of his business remotely. Evenings, they explored local restaurants Emma researched meticulously, each offering authentic cuisine far from the celebrity-filled establishments Zachary typically frequented. On their 6th day together, Zachary took Emma to see Miller Tech's research facility in Los Angeles. He watched her face light up as his engineers demonstrated the next generation of solar technology they were developing. Her questions were insightful, sometimes challenging his team in ways they clearly weren't used to. "Your scientists love what they do," Emma observed as they left the building. "You can see it in how they talk about their work." "I used to be like that," Zachary admitted as they walked to his car, a Tesla, not the Lamborghini he usually drove. "When we were just starting out, working from a garage in Palo Alto, I'd stay up all night solving problems because I couldn't bear to stop." "What happened?" "Success, I suppose. More responsibility, more distance from the actual work." Emma was silent for a moment. "You know, you could change that." The simplicity of her statement struck him. He could change that. He was, after all, the majority shareholder and CEO of his company. If anyone could restructure his role, it was him. That evening, they sat on the terrace of Zachary's Malibu home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Emma had her camera out, capturing the light playing across the water. "I leave tomorrow," she said quietly, lowering her camera. Zachary felt his stomach tighten. "I know, this week has been unexpected for me too." He reached for her hand. "Come with me to my place in Hawaii next month. It's on a protected bay where humpbacks come to calve. You could photograph them." Emma looked away. "Zachary, I live out of 2 suitcases. I'm on assignment 11 months of the year. My life doesn't exactly mesh with whatever this is. What if mine could?" The words left his mouth before he fully considered them, but once spoken, he realized how much he meant them. "What if I could change how I work, where I focus my energy?" "You'd do that for someone you met a week ago." "No," he said honestly. "I'd do it for myself because you've reminded me what matters, but I'd like you to be part of whatever comes next." Emma set her camera down and turned to face him fully. "I'm not looking to be anyone's renovation project, Zachary." "That's not what I'm saying," he insisted. "Meeting you, it's like finding a mirror I didn't know I needed. You've shown me how far I've drifted from what I care about." Later that night, as they lay together in his bed, the sound of waves crashing outside, Emma traced patterns on his chest. "Tell me something real," she whispered. "Something you've never told anyone." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. "I'm lonely," he finally said. "I have 1,200 employees, a personal staff of 8, and I sit in meetings surrounded by people all day, but I'm profoundly lonely." Emma's hand stilled on his chest. "And now?" "Now I'm terrified that after you leave tomorrow, I'll be lonelier than before because I'll know exactly what I'm missing." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I still have to go to Alaska. I know. And after that, it's the coral reefs in Australia. I understand. But maybe," she said softly, "we could try to find a way that doesn't require either of us to give up who we are." In the morning, Zachary drove Emma to the airport. The goodbye was harder than he'd expected, even knowing they had plans to meet in Alaska in 3 weeks. "This is crazy, isn't it?" Emma asked as they stood at the security checkpoint. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," Zachary replied, pulling her close. "I know you make me want to be better. I know you see the world in a way that challenges me. I know this week has been the most alive I've felt in years." Their kiss was both a goodbye and a promise. As he watched her disappear through security, Zachary felt an unfamiliar mixture of loss and hope. The 3 weeks until Alaska were transformative. Zachary called an emergency board meeting and announced his intention to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on innovation and sustainability initiatives. His board was initially resistant until he laid out his vision for how this shift would position the company for the future. By the end of the meeting, even his most skeptical board members were cautiously supportive. He and Emma spoke daily, their conversations ranging from the mundane details of their days to profound discussions about purpose and legacy. Zachary found himself sharing thoughts he'd never articulated to anyone, and Emma's perspectives continued to challenge and inspire him. When they reunited in Alaska, the connection between them had only grown stronger. Zachary joined Emma on her glacier expedition, experiencing firsthand the rapid changes she documented. The days were physically demanding, the accommodations rustic, and the weather often brutal, all conditions the old Zachary would have found intolerable. Instead, he found them invigorating. One evening, as they huddled in a small research cabin, watching the northern lights dance across the sky, Emma turned to him. "You're different here." "Different how?" "More present. Back in Malibu, even when you were with me, part of you was always elsewhere thinking about work or checking your phone when you thought I wouldn't notice." Zachary nodded, acknowledging the truth in her observation. "I think I needed to get away from my normal environment to remember who I am beneath all the trappings." "And who is that?" "Someone who wants to build things that matter, someone who wants a partner who challenges him, not just admires his success." He took her hand. "Someone who's falling in love with an environmental photojournalist who couldn't care less about his bank account." Emma's eyes widened. "That's a big statement for someone you've known less than a month." "Sometimes you just know," he said simply. Over the following 6 months, they created a rhythm to their relationship that honored both their needs. Zachary restructured his work to focus on the environmental initiatives that energized him, delegating much of the corporate management to his capable executive team. He traveled frequently to join Emma on her assignments, working remotely when necessary, and discovering that his creativity flourished in these new environments. Emma, for her part, began to incorporate Miller Tech's sustainability projects into her work, documenting how technology could be part of environmental solutions rather than problems. Her photographs brought attention to initiatives Zachary's company supported, creating a virtuous cycle that benefited them both professionally while deepening their personal connection. In beach huts in Thailand, research stations in the Amazon, and remote villages in Africa, they built a relationship grounded in shared values and mutual respect. The man who once measured success by acquisition values and stock prices found himself measuring it instead by the impact of his work and the depth of his connection with Emma. A year after their first meeting on that Malibu beach, they returned to the same spot. The cliff had indeed eroded further, just as Emma had predicted. "I've been thinking about this house," Zachary said as they walked along the shore. "It seems wrong to fight so hard to protect a single mansion when that money could help communities that are truly vulnerable to climate change." Emma looked up at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm thinking of selling it and donating the proceeds to coastal protection in places that need it more than Malibu," she smiled. The old Zachary Millerton would never have considered that. The old Zachary Millerton was worried about appearances. This one is more concerned with impact. He took her hand and led her to a spot where the waves gently lapped at the sand. "I've been thinking about something else, too." From his pocket, he produced a small box. Emma's eyes widened. "I'm not asking you to change who you are," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring with a simple band holding a piece of sea glass instead of a diamond. "I love who you are, your independence, your passion, your perspective. I'm asking if you'll let me be part of your journey wherever it takes you." Emma took the ring, examining the smooth glass. "Is this from this beach? The day after we met, I found it and kept it, even though I had no idea why at the time." He took a deep breath. Emma Rhodes, will you marry me? Her eyes shone with unshed tears. On one condition, anything, we never stop challenging each other to be better, Zachary laughed. That's a condition I can happily accept. Their wedding, 6 months later, was held on a conservation reserve Zachary had recently helped establish. Instead of gifts, they asked guests to contribute to environmental causes. The ceremony was simple, the celebration joyous, and when they exchanged vows, both meant every word. 2 years into their marriage, they maintained homes in 3 locations, small, sustainable ones, each serving as a base for their work in different regions. Emma continued her photography, now supplemented by a foundation they'd established together to support environmental education. Zachary led Miller Tech's research division, focusing on innovations that could address climate challenges. On their 2nd anniversary, they sat on the deck of their home in Costa Rica, watching monkeys play in the trees surrounding their property. You ever miss it? Emma asked. The mansions, the private jets, the life of luxury? Zachary considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the convenience, he admitted. But no, I don't miss the emptiness that came with it all. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. When I met you on that beach, I never imagined where it would lead. Neither did I, Zachary replied, wrapping his arm around her. I was just a lonely millionaire taking a walk by the ocean. And I was just a photographer trying to document how that ocean was going to swallow your house. Emma laughed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar oranges and pinks, Zachary reflected on the strange serendipity of their meeting. One walk on one beach had changed everything: his priorities, his purpose, his heart. The tide had washed away the man he'd been and left behind someone better, someone whole. Emma picked up her ever-present camera to capture the sunset, and Zachary watched her with a fullness in his chest that no amount of money could ever buy. Some people spent their lives accumulating wealth only to discover too late that the real treasures couldn't be purchased or possessed. He'd been fortunate enough to learn that lesson while there was still time to live by it. The waves crashed against the shore below their deck, a reminder of that first meeting and the journey that had brought them here. Different ocean, different shore, same endless possibilities stretching before them, a future they would build together, one day, one choice, one shared purpose at a time.